So we kind of left off talking about Sumer, and how it eventually fell to the Akkadians, who were their rulers to the north, and they had a single king. And so we'll take a look at one of their pieces from the Akkadian Empire of Mesopotamia, and it is called The Head of an Akkadian Ruler. It's 2300 to 2200 BCE. It's made out of bronze, and the height of it is 12 inches. And it's basically the depiction of one of the Akkadian rulers, uh, and it portrays an absolute monarch. He has a very calm expression. It's made using the lost wax technique, which is a casting technique, and they did it in bronze. So it's actually a pretty advanced technology that they're using to make this. So it's hollow on the inside as well. It's representational in style, but it does feature this kind of very elaborate beard and hairstyle that has a lot of rhythm and pattern present all over in the, especially the hairstyle, and the beard has a lot of pattern and rhythm. And this style of the Akkadian king shows influences from the Sumerian style. And this same style from, the Sumerians and the Akkadians and Mesopotamia in general does end up kind of infusing with the later Egyptian art that comes into being. And the ancient Egyptians are thought to have borrowed a lot of things from the earlier ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia. So we're going to kind of start talking about Egypt now. We're going to transition from one area to a different area. Instead of the Indus and Tigris rivers, we're going to go by the Nile in Egypt, Africa. So the ancient Egyptians had deserts on either side of them, which really diminished outside influences or rivalries. And this is very much unlike Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia, as you know, that we talked about, they had a geography that made for a lot of overthrowing cultures all of the time, constant fighting for supremacy amongst the peoples of Mesopotamia. But the geography of Egypt was very different, and just because of those deserts on either side, so it really allowed for the Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians, to develop a very distinctive Bronze Age style of architecture and painting and sculpture that remained relatively unchanged for 2,500 years. Now, today, our fashions and art change so quickly, it's hard to imagine a style that would be in vogue for 2,500 years. Like, that's obviously something that would only happen before, like, the advent of, like, all of the technology that we have now, I guess. So, we'll talk about architecture. Obviously, the Great Pyramids of Giza in Egypt are probably the most impressive and memorable artworks, architecture from ancient Egypt. The Great Pyramids are located in a place called Giza. They're basically these huge mountain-like structures, and they're really large burial vaults and memorials to the Egyptian kings who were basically considered gods. Legions of workers and slaves, some people think they were slaves, some people think that they were actually well compensated for the work they did, but legions of workers cut huge stone blocks and stacked them without mortar, so there's no mortar, and they formed the pyramid that way, and they're mostly solid, but they do have some passageways inside of them that lead to the king's burial chambers. So one thing about the Egyptians, they're very obsessed with death and the afterlife, even more so than they were probably with life itself. And they believe that the soul, or Ka, as they would call it, it's Ka, I believe, would live on after death. So the body would die, but their soul would live on. So they tried to preserve the body as best they could by embalming the bodies so that the soul had a place to reside. And this was considered essential for life beyond the grave, to preserve your body or embalm your body. And they would embalm the kings and then bury them in elaborate tombs, these pyramids or temple-like structures. And they would surround the body with tools, riches. Servants would oftentimes, be killed so that they could accompany their master in the afterlife. Different artifacts, they even surrounded them with furniture, anything that they might need in the afterlife, which a lot of the things that they thought they needed in the afterlife were things that they needed in life. The ancient Egyptian architects also put a lot of effort into hiding these tombs so that they would not be robbed from tomb robbers. Much of what we know about the ancient Egyptian society comes from the tombs that they left behind, which are also full of hieroglyphic inscriptions, so we can learn more that way as well. So we're going to talk about the funerary temple of Queen Hatshepsut. Here it is. It looks very different than the other tombs that we looked at, but it has the same function as the pyramids. It just looks a lot different. It's very much later in the history of Egypt, 1490, 1460 BCE. And this is built into a cliffside along the Nile River originally, and it features ramps and colonnades. Inside, wall paintings and reliefs tell of the queen's life. One particular set of reliefs and paintings tell of an expedition that the queen funded to the legendary birthplace of the gods, which was supposedly her own birthplace because she's considered a god as well. So this grand temple shows, Hatshepsut really trying to be taken seriously as the ruler of ancient Egypt. She is one of the first women to show up as an important ruler in the history of art, so that's actually very important to note. And this temple is thought to have been designed by Sennemut, who was Queen's chancellor, probably her advisor. He was an artist and is one of the very few early artists that we know of. Ancient Egyptians considered artists at the same level as manual laborers, so they were pretty low class, and they oftentimes did not sign any of their work. It just wasn't considered very important. But Sennemut actually, he became very powerful, but he did come from modest means, not far from the city of Luxor and Karnak, and he basically rose to power through, just a lot of hard work. So we can see a depiction of Sennemut done by an artist. It shows that he has kind of a hook nose and a near double chin here. And this drawing here was enlarged and put on the wall of Hatshepsut's funerary temple. It's thought that Sennemut also tutored Neferure, Hatshepsut's daughter, and this brought him a lot closer to the royal family, and he rose in power. And who knows, maybe eventually the Queen Hatshepsut, appointed him her administrator to the Temple of Karnak, and he also helped her build her funerary temple, and so he may have served as architect to the queen as well. And this is a block statue of Sennemut with his Hatshepsut's daughter, and it's about 40 inches high. And Sennemut commissioned a large tomb to preserve himself in the afterlife, and it actually had more than 20 statues. And one shows him with a student, and this is the queen's daughter, Neferure. I can't really say her name very well. This particular work basically has an inscription that suggests he played a major role in how this ended up looking. And there's also a prayer about him and his student, and it's technically a block statue. As you can see, it's got a block made for inscriptions, so there's lots of surface area for inscription, and the blockiness also has no edges that will break off easily. So they're really wanting to, the artist is really wanting this piece to withstand the test of time. So Sennemut eventually disappears from surviving inscriptions, which suggests he either died young or just fell out of favor with the queen. His tomb was never finished, and his body was not found in his tomb, so we're not quite sure what happened to him. But the fact that his funerary temple is built close to the queen's is a testimony to his importance in her life at one point in time, at least, and a testimony to like an artist really coming from a low class and maybe rising up in power. So kind of one of the first narratives of that type. So we'll talk about sculpture and wall painting next that the ancient Egyptians made. They made portrait sculpture of the deceased person, and this was to aid his or her in the successful transfer into the afterlife. So these statues that they made of the deceased serve as receptacles to the spirit of the deceased. So the soul would come out of the body. Maybe the body would be damaged, so that it might go into maybe one of the statues or the portrait statues. Um, the style of the sculpture is very strong and clear, and the Egyptians worked with stone. And first they sketched on the stone, and then they carved working inward on the stone. So we can take a look at a group of statues. Um, it's a triple figure statue, and it shows the pharaoh Menkaura at the center wearing the crown of Upper Egypt. Hathor is the goddess. She's on the left. She has the crown of bull's horns with the sun in the middle, and she represents fertility. And she also welcomes souls into the afterlife, which she is actually doing here. She's holding his hand. And on the other side is the local goddess, central to the Nile region. And it's very, very clearly shown. There's a union of portraiture and idealization here. So it's a very idealized portrait of the king. He has a very youthful, perfect body. So do the women here. There's no wrinkles or... so it's very idealized. And he looks perfect, youthful. The figures are in this very frontal pose. The ruler always has his left foot forward. It's just a way of identifying the ruler. And they're still kind of a part of the stone. They're not completely free from the stone, which actually helps them to not break. Because like I said, the Egyptians are trying to make this stuff last forever. Because this could potentially become a place for the king's ka, or spirit, if his body is damaged. And Menkaura's face appears to stare off into eternity. So really, they're thinking about time and trying to make these things last as long as possible, basically. Next up, we'll take a look at, a mask from the tomb of Tutankhamun. King Tut was basically, an 18-year-old when he died. He's one of the most famous Egyptian pharaohs because his tomb was one of the only ones discovered in modern times that was untouched by grave robbers. And we'll take a look at the inlaid gold mask from his mummy case. And it does, like the other statues of Egypt, portraiture. It's just a blend of portraiture and idealization. So this might have a few things that actually are from his actual, like maybe he had big ears. But like other than that, this is totally just, an idealized image. It's not a true portrait of Tutankhamun. Ancient Egyptian artists showed figures from either completely frontal or in profile positions. They don't really have like complex angles that they show figures in. And they tried to show each part of the human body in the most easily identifiable way from the most easily identifiable angle, which they thought was either profile or frontal. So they wanted to avoid any confusion from random views or angles of the body. Usually the face is in profile, the body is frontal, the feet, arms, and legs are in profile. We'll take a look at a wall painting from the tomb of Nebanum from Thebes, Egypt, 1450 BCE, and it's painted on dry plaster. And as you can see, the king's figure is painted in a mixture of frontal and profile views. And this is what they considered to be the clearest and most identifiable way to paint a human figure. This type of style in figure painting is present in almost all ancient Egyptian art. They always paint their figures this way. The head, hips, legs, and feet are shown from the side, while the eyes and shoulders are shown from the front. So in real life, we don't actually look like this, but this is how they thought that was the most easily identifiable way of painting a human. And so if we take a look at this, we can see this is kind of a hunting scene. His head, hips, and legs and feet are shown from the side. He's the largest figure, Nebanum. And that shows that he is also the most important figure. So ancient Egyptian artists used the hierarchy of scale to show importance of figures. So basically the largest figure is the most important, and then the next largest is the next most important figure. And then all the slaves in this work, as you can see, are very small. It shows that they're low class. Nebanum and his wife and daughter stand on a boat made of papyrus. There's plants and teeming life all around them. So Egyptian art greatly influences the art of the Greeks and later Romans, and art from our world is still influenced by the Romans. So